Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this final lecture in our program on the modern novel. My name is Fouzi Slisli. Today's lecture, number 14, is going to be a revision. This course has been divided into three sections. The first section looks at modernism. The second section looks at Animal Farm. And the third section looks at Lord of the Flies. And then we did one revision lecture for each section. So this last lecture looks at the themes of Lord of the Flies. So let's begin. Well, the first theme in Lord of the Flies, of course, is the struggle to build a civilization. Because if you remember, Lord of the Flies is an allegory. And an allegory is a story that stands for another story. So the real story of the novel, or the events of the novel, boys stranded on a deserted island. Yeah, it's realistic, it looks real, but actually the real story here is human society, especially after the World War, the First World War. The question is, can humanity rebuild civilization? Because of the amount of destruction that happened after the First World War, and later on also after the Second World War, and the inclination towards destruction that human beings have shown in these world wars, made this question all the more pertinent. Can human beings rebuild civilization? And in this process of rebuilding civilization, what are the obstacles? And Lord of the Flies tells us that every human being, that all human beings have still strong primitive instincts. And at the same time, they have a drive to build and to create laws and civilization. But at the same time, the drive to destruction, primitive destruction and savagery is still strong in human beings. So according to the novel, this is the struggle of our age, of our times. Can human beings overcome? Can they overcome these primitive destructive drives that they have and succeed in building societies of laws and where people are respected and where the common good is set above the drive for power or for destruction that individuals have. So the struggle to build civilization forms the main conflict of Lord of the Flies. Ralph and Piggy believe that structure, rules, and maintaining a signal fire are the greatest priorities. So structure, rules, and maintaining a signal fire. I mean, if you think in terms of like humanity, humanity needs a structure, social structure. They need rules, and they need to maintain a signal fire to save themselves. Now, we can go deeper and look at these symbols, especially the signal fire. The signal fire makes sense in the context of a deserted island and the group of boys stranded on it. But in terms of society and humanity, what is the signal fire? And it saves us from what? These are questions that I just raise and leave up in the air like that, but we don't need to, and I don't think we can enter into proper discussion to answer them at this point. So Ralph and Piggy believe that structure, rules, and maintaining a signal fire are the greatest priorities. Jack believes hunting, violence, and fun should be prioritized over safety, protection, and planning for the future. And these here represent the two drives that struggle over the soul of humanity in a way. While initially the boys, including Jack, agreed to abide by Ralph's rules and democratic decision-making, the slow and thoughtful process of building an orderly society proves too difficult for many of the boys because it takes patient work. They don't want to help build the shelters. That was the first step, building shelters for everyone, including, especially for the little boys. But quickly the boys don't want to help build the shelters. They don't want to maintain the signal fire or take care of the little ones. And the immediate fun and visceral rewards of hunting, chanting, and dancing around the fire are more attractive than the work of building a sustainable society. Near the end of the novel, even Ralph is tempted by Jack's authoritarian regime, regularly forgetting why the fire and rescue is so important. So the sign that this drive towards fun and chanting and hunting and violence instead of work, patient work, is so attractive that even Ralph, towards the end of the novel, is tempted by joining that party. And this leads us to another important theme, and that's man's inherent evil. According to the story, or the story puts this question on the table, that evil is inherent in human beings. It's not something outside, it's not a beast, it's inside every human being. The fact that the main characters in Lord of the Flies are young boys suggests the potential for evil is inherent even in small children. In a way, it comes with being a human being. Jack, for example, is initially keen for rules and civility. That's how he begins. But he becomes obsessed with hunting and frightened and empowered by the promise of violence. Jack's desire to control and subjugate proves more powerful than his desire for empathy, intellect, and civilization. And Jack becomes a brutal leader. So Jack doesn't start bad. He begins as a constructive member of the team. He accepts Ralph's leadership and accepts Ralph's program of building shelters for everyone, taking care of each other. But it's just that his desire for control and subjugation and violence proves to be more powerful than his desire for empathy, intellect, and civilization. And quickly Jack, in a way, sheds all of this and chooses, I don't know if he chooses, but it's even like, it seems like it's more powerful than him. He becomes a brutal leader. Even Ralph and Piggy, who both strive to maintain their sense of humanity, ultimately join in on the mass murder of Simon. And Ralph and Piggy are the most reasonable of the boys. So if even the most reasonable in the end ultimately join in on the mass murder of Simon, who is the nicest of the boys, then that says a lot. That even the best of us, right, the best can succumb, can give in to this drive towards destruction and violence. momentarily, Ralph and Piggy momentarily surrendering to the thrill of violence and mass hysteria. While Piggy tries to ignore their participation, Ralph is devastated when he realizes that he is no better than Jack or Roger, and that he has a darkness inside him as well. When he realizes that he's not different from Jack or brutal Roger, he's just like them. He has a dark side inside as well. But the character of Simon suggests humans can resist their inherently violent tendencies. Simon turns out to be the nicest kid, the only boy who never participates in the island's savagery. Simon has the purest moral code and is able to remain an individual, a civilized individual throughout Lord of the Flies. He remains considerate, he remains respectful, he remains productive, and never gives in to the drive to mass hysteria, violence, and so on. While the others consider him weak and strange, Simon stands up for Piggy and the little ones, so he's not weak. He helped Ralph build the shelters and provides thoughtful and insightful assessment of their predicament. So Simon is not weak, on the contrary. He's strong, and even stronger because he succeeds. He's the only one who succeeds in controlling himself. Simon recognizes that the beast is not a physical beast, but perhaps the darkness and innate brutality within the boys themselves. After a terrifying conversation with the Lord of the Flies, Simon recognizes the paratrooper as a symbol of fear and the boys as agents of evil, and he runs to tell the others. But Simon is never able to properly explain this to the other boys before they beat him to death in a frenzy of excitement and fear. And in a way, that's a sad comment on what happens to the best inclination, the best example among the boys. That's what happens to him. He gets beaten to death in a frenzy of excitement and fear for no reason, at a time when he was bringing some valuable knowledge to the boys. And that brings us to another theme that's very important. It's the dangers of mob mentality. Mob mentality is when human beings operate as a group of madmen. You know, when, like, for example, you see a mob mentality, for example, in football stadiums, when football supporters all of a sudden become hooligans and start destroying and beating and breaking and shouting, and you see them like they're not individuals anymore, they're a mob, right? And mob mentality quickly becomes frenzy and turns into violence. And the novel warns about the dangers of mob mentality when individuals give up their ability to think and discern and judge and just go with the flow, and that flow can be dangerous. And also, as far as like a critique of totalitarianism in political situations, a lot of leaders nurture a mob's mentality. They nurture it and strengthen it and use it against their enemies. So Lord of the Flies warns about the dangers of mob mentality. Mob mentality should have no place in a civilized society, because a civilized society should be made up of thinking individuals who can evaluate and judge and discern right from wrong, and not just jump in and take part in frenzied efforts or frenzied adventures, and do horrible things that later on they might wake up and regret. Lord of the Flies explores the dangers of mob mentality in terrifying scenes of violence and torture. Early on, the boys sing, "Kill the pig, cut the throat, spill the blood." Kill the pig, cut the throat, spill the blood. After a successful hunt, elevating their shared act of violence into celebratory chant. So they start glorifying the act of violence. By becoming together a mob, the boys transform the upsetting experience of killing an animal into a bonding ritual. It becomes something they celebrate and are proud of, and they elevate it and use it as an incident to bond with each other, to feel part of a group together. Acting as one group, the boys are able to commit worse and worse crimes, deluding one another into believing in the potential danger posed by the beast justifies their violence. So this story of the beast, we know, the readers know that it's not true. But the boys start using it over and over, using it to justify their violence against each other. Similarly, the boys use war paint to hide their identities as individuals. And in a way, they melt into the mob group. They're not individuals anymore, they're just part of a mob. And avoid personal responsibility. Ralph, Piggy, both fear and envy the hunters. Liberation into savagery. Their desire to be part of the group leads to voluntary participation in the ritualistic dance and the brutal killing of Simon. The mob's shared irrational fear and proclivity towards violence results in a devastating act of ultimate cruelty. So these are the three most important themes in Lord of the Flies, and they're connected one